There's something happening in our culture right now that we need to talk about. Actually, it's happening in every culture. We all want to feel connected to the people around us. But in today's hyper-connected online world, real connection feels more elusive than ever before. We have unprecedented, easy access to people across the globe. We're constantly engaging with one another. Yet engagement does not necessarily lead to connection. In fact, researchers from the Yale School of Public Health report that we are facing a global epidemic of social disconnection, loneliness, isolation. So what's happening? Based on a decade of my work, I believe that today's social disconnection is actually rooted in an epidemic of cross-cultural miscommunication. How we communicate and who we communicate with has shifted radically in recent years, but we haven't adapted with that shift. We're still communicating using our default assumptions and expectations without realizing how much of our communication has become miscommunication. For most, this is a new phenomenon, but as an immigrant who moved here when I was 4 years old, navigating cultural miscommunications has always been a part of my life. I'll never forget, I'm 10 years old, extremely shy, and I've just finished giving a speech in front of my entire school about my favorite television show, The Simpsons, of course. And I'm feeling really proud of myself. And then the teacher judging the contest frowns at me and says, "Do you really think that The Simpsons is appropriate for a child your age?" In an instant, my pride turned into a knot in my stomach. I almost felt sick. I could feel my cheeks burning as I tried to come up with an answer. I didn't understand the American subtext or the show's controversial themes, and neither did my family. To us, it was just a fun cartoon. And standing there, red-faced and mortified for the entire student body, I knew that I had missed something, but I didn't know what. These days, I'm a cross-cultural communication and voice consultant who's worked with hundreds of individuals who desire to connect. Yet they regularly leave conversations and meetings and jobs feeling frustrated and confused as to where they went wrong. So today I'm going to share with you the most important lesson that I've learned about why we struggle to connect with people from different backgrounds, and a simple way that you can bridge that gap with anyone you meet. But first, since we're just meeting right now, I'd like to ask you, where are you from? If a stranger asks you this, how do you feel? Be honest. Happy to share? Maybe a bit skeptical? Angry? If you're perfectly happy to answer, chances are you're not an immigrant. Most of my immigrant clients despise this question, and I do mean despise. They say that it feels invasive, that the question itself implies that they're outsiders, that they don't belong. Most of my non-immigrant clients hear the exact same question and think nothing of it. It's just friendly small talk. How can the same simple question feel so casual to one group and so unwelcoming to another? This question perfectly illustrates the internal response cycle that's activated when we communicate and miscommunicate. It has 3 phases. First, we reframe. Our brain instantly filters the encounter through our past experiences, culture, and beliefs. If you're worried about belonging, your brain interprets that question as a threat. If belonging's not a concern, your brain views it as a friendly invitation. Second, we react, but not to the encounter itself. We react emotionally to the story that our brains attach to it. Depending on the story, we might feel warmth and acceptance, or pain and rejection. And third, we respond. This is where we choose how to act. If we perceive the interaction as negative, we retreat, putting up a wall to protect ourselves from what we believe to be a rude, insensitive person. If we perceive it as positive, we engage, opening up the door to connection. This question, this internal response process, is fueling much of today's disconnection. But imagine if instead, when someone does or says something unexpected or confusing, we interrupt that cycle of misunderstanding with one simple question. What else could this mean? This one question does something powerful. It breaks the link between the present moment and the story that your brain's attached to it, creating space for curiosity and alternative perspectives to emerge, opening up the door to connection. I'll give you an example. I've worked with many clients from France over the years, and a lot of them struggle with giving and receiving constructive feedback with North Americans. You see, in France, blunt and brutal honesty is viewed as transparent and respectful, while in North America, respectful negative feedback is often sandwiched between positive statements to prioritize harmony. Now, you can imagine the level of miscommunication that occurs when the French interact with North Americans. The French think that the North Americans are dishonest, and the North Americans think that the French are rude. But by pausing and asking, what else could this mean? We can move beyond our assumptions of rude and dishonest and open up the door to connection. But connection isn't just about words. Do you remember getting a text message back in the day on one of those old flip phones, and it just said, okay? And you had no idea whether that was a friendly, okay, or a slightly annoyed, okay, or a, we are done having this conversation, okay? In the early days of texting, we didn't have emojis to convey intent, and we were often left guessing. In spoken communication, tone of voice plays a similar role. It adds layers of meaning beyond the words, signaling emotions, attitudes, and intent. But here's the challenge. How we use and interpret tone is deeply influenced by our cultural context and native language. So what sounds confident and respectful to one person may in fact sound rude and dismissive to another. We've learned to bridge this gap with written messages, but we do need to acknowledge that the same risk for miscommunication exists when we speak. Because when we're interacting with someone whose native language uses tone differently or not at all, it's very easy for misunderstandings to happen because we may be interpreting their message differently than they intended. In other words, it's like you're receiving different emojis than the ones that they're sending. I'll give you an example. A friend of mine recently moved here from China, and she wanted to express her thanks to the grocery store clerk when she was checking out. So naturally, she said, "Thank you." And the clerk looked at her confused and said, "Was that sarcasm?" You see, despite my friend's best intentions, her tone of voice was misinterpreted as sarcasm instead of sincerity. And that was just a thank you. When entire conversations are full of tonal misinterpretations, miscommunication is virtually guaranteed. It leads to labeling others as rude, sarcastic, disinterested, what have you, when in fact, they may actually be trying to connect. But by pausing and asking, what else could this mean? We can break that cycle of miscommunication and move beyond our negative assumptions towards connection. Now, of course, there is a risk in doing this because maybe someone is trying to be rude. But if we never take this small risk, we miss the chance to connect with those who are genuinely reaching out. And more often than not, people do have positive intent. In fact, I'm willing to bet that in your phone right now, you have many more messages with smiley faces and signs of friendliness than hostility. Am I right? But here's the best part. By interrupting this cycle over time, you'll gather new information and new stories that'll change how you engage with others moving forward. Stories free from labels like invasive, rude, sarcastic, dishonest. Just human stories, shaped by experiences different than our own, that can transform the way we connect with the world. Once we understand that, connection's possible with anyone from any culture. Everyone I've shared this with reports feeling less frustration and greater confidence communicating with people from different backgrounds and from similar ones. When we bring curiosity to cross-cultural communication, we unlock the value of diverse perspectives because we can finally hear them. If enough of us start asking, what else could this mean? We can transform not just our conversations and relationships, but the culture itself. Because connection isn't built on what we think we know about each other, but on our willingness to question the stories we've come to believe. Thank you.